Hello and welcome. I am Kate Popinsick. I'm the Assistant Director of Advancement focused on alumni and volunteer engagement and strategy in the College of Business. It's my pleasure to be your host for today's event. I'm here alongside Dr. Jay Hardy, our Associate Dean for Research, and Dr. Matthew Hall, Assistant Professor of Marketing and today's featured faculty speaker. As we've done at previous Thought Leadership Series events, we'll begin today with a presentation of Dr. Hall's Thought Leadership talk, The Perils of Going Viral, How Receiving Online Attention Can Bias Our Perceptions. Following Matt's talk today, we will host you in an interactive session where you, as our attendees, can engage directly with him. As you listen to today's talk, I encourage you to take note of any questions or curiosities or interesting insights that arise. Doing so will help you explore further into the topics that pique your interest when you interact directly with him during the Q&A session later in today's event. Now I'm excited to hand it over to Dr. Jay Hardy. Jay is dedicated to evaluating and enhancing our research impact while fostering a culture of research excellence within the College of Business.
Thank you for joining us today for our Winter Term Thought Leadership Series event. My name is Jay Hardy. I'm the Steerick Associate Dean for Research in the College of Business. The Oregon State College of Business created the Thought Leadership Series a few years back as a way to share innovative faculty research coming out of the college that seeks to address some of the most important challenges we face today as a society. Making thought-provoking faculty research coming out of the college more accessible to a wider audience is one of the many ways that the College of Business fulfills its land-grant mission of making education accessible to everyone. And it underscores our ways in which our faculty research has the potential to enrich the day-to-day lives of people in Oregon and beyond, changing them for the better. I'm proud to report that the College of Business had an outstanding year last year in research. In the last year alone, faculty in the college produced over 40 new peer-reviewed publications featuring 35 total faculty members college-wide. 14 of these papers were published in the world's top business journals. On top of this, we doubled grant-related expenditures for the second consecutive year, a notable achievement for a college not typically known for its grant funding. Our 8 faculty-led centers of excellence have partnered with industry to produce 24 research projects, all of which have yielded results that propel businesses toward problem solving and growth. Additionally, we continue to work to enhance our external reputation and work to foster both internal and external collaboration, including hosting numerous talks by some of the world's leading researchers to highlight our faculty's impactful work. Today, it is my unique privilege to introduce Dr. Matthew Hall, Assistant Professor of Marketing here in the College of Business. Dr. Hall's research delves into the intriguing world of consumer behavior with a particular focus on how social influence, word of mouth, social media, and experiential consumption shape consumer perceptions and behavior. He is especially interested in the way consumers' online sharing of their experiences affect both their own perceptions and those of others. His work also explores how viewers' evaluations of digital content, like images, influence both content perceptions and the sharer's images. Dr. Hall teaches courses such as Principles of Marketing and Integrated Marketing Analytics project, where he equips students with insights drawn from cutting-edge research. He has presented his work at numerous prestigious conferences, including the Association for Consumer Research and the Society for Consumer Psychology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Matthew Hall, a leading expert in the dynamic intersection of consumer behavior and digital interactions.
Hi, I'm Matt Hall, and I'm an Assistant Professor of Marketing in the College of Business, and I'm here today to talk about how receiving attention online can bias consumer perceptions. So we're talking about this idea of consumer-to-consumer attention exchange, which is basically just this broad idea that consumers pay attention to each other. We see this happening in person conversations, we see this happening online, but what I'm specifically interested in is how people who get attention can perhaps report some unintended consequences. So before we get started with sort of these consequences, I want to make sure we're on the same page about what I mean by attention. Attention refers to mental engagement that focuses on one stimulus while excluding others. So attention is inherently sort of prioritizing. When you make the decision to pay attention to one thing, you're also making the decision to exclude other things that are competing for your attention. And what I think makes attention really interesting is that it's a finite resource. We all have a limited supply of attention that's dictated sort of by the amount of stimuli we can focus our eyeballs on in a given day. It's bound by time. But at the same time, while our attention remains steady, the demands for our attention increases exponentially. And so if we think about supply and demand, as demand goes up, which we know demand for our attention is social media posts, news stories, people, work, kids, everything that demands our attention, those are going up. But the supply of our attention stays the same. Economics will tell us that that's increasing the value of our attention. And there's a lot of evidence out there for why attention is valued, or the fact that it is valued. If we look at people are willing to do just about anything to get attention. There are news reports of people literally walking off of cliffs trying to get the perfect selfie because they want to get more likes. We pay with our attention. We watch ads on YouTube. That's us paying for the privilege to use their programming, paying with our attention rather than currency. And then those platforms turn around and they're using our attention, they're leveraging our attention to make money from their ad sources. And then if we look at celebrities and influencers, the ability to get attention and keep attention is a large determinant of status and wealth. Those celebrities and influencers who are the most successful right now are the ones who are able to keep large quantities of consumer attention. I'm particularly interested in what happens when consumers like you and me share content and receive attention. And I'm specifically interested in this because there's a lot of evidence that shows that when people share content online, they're very attuned to how much feedback they get, how many views, how many likes, how many comments, and those types of feedback metrics. So in my studies, what I'm interested in is when people share content online, what happens when they receive more attention versus when they receive less attention. And I'm specifically interested in a couple of focal outcomes. First, I'm going to be talking about consumers' satisfaction with their shared experiences. And second, I'm going to be talking about sharers' offline attention biases. And I'll explain a little bit more about each of these phenomena when we get there. So first, we're going to be talking about satisfaction with shared experiences. One of the ways that consumers get attention most frequently is by sharing about their consumption experiences. So I go to an OSU football game, I go to the zoo, I go to a pumpkin patch. I'm going to share about this content online, and I'm going to receive varying levels of attention. Some posts might receive a whole bunch of attention. They might sort of blow up or go viral, if you will. Other posts might receive a little bit less attention. Maybe I share that content and I hear crickets, so to speak. So for example, the post on the left, you'll see that the person received 100 views. The person on the right shared the same content and got 10 views. So this is an actual example of some stimuli that I've used in a study that I've run. And what I'm interested in is if the same consumer shares one post or shares this post and gets either higher amount of attention or lower, what happens? How do they respond to that? And just to kind of pull the lead right out, what happens is the more attention that they get, they report higher satisfaction with that experience, and then they go on when they share about those experiences, they use more positive language when they write those reviews. So if I share and I receive feedback on the left here, I'm going to be more satisfied with that roller coaster experience. And then when I tell other people about that roller coaster, I'm going to use more positive language in that word of mouth if I share and receive that feedback on the left versus that feedback on the right. I've also run a study where I've actually constructed a social media simulation. This was a fun study we ran in the lab where we had students actually consume an experience and share about it, and then we got to actually manipulate the amount of attention that they received. So rather than having it be hypothetical, we said, here's the actual amount of attention that you're getting from these other people in this simulation. How do you respond? And we've observed this effect using a lot of different experiences, everything from roller coasters to pumpkin patches to holiday markets to mini golf to bowling, all of these different experiences. We've measured satisfaction in a lot of different ways. We've looked at online and offline attention, multiple sharing platforms. So this is a very robust effect. And why does this happen? Well, it happens because when we get attention, it's a positive signal about our status, right? If other people are paying attention to the things that I share, it makes me feel better about myself and my relationships with those people. And when we're experiencing increased self-esteem, we tend to remember our past experiences more positively. So one outcome of receiving more attention when we share content online is that it leads us to actually remember these experiences that we've shared more positively. More or less positively, I should say, depending on whether we get higher levels or lower levels of attention from others. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about a phenomenon called the spotlight bias. The spotlight bias is this idea that we tend to walk around in our day-to-day lives and we think that people pay more attention to us than is actually the case. So as an example of this, if you have a little stain on your shirt, or if you're having a bad hair day, if you walk into work or into a family gathering or a gathering of friends, you are going to think that there's a spotlight shining on you and everybody's noticing that stain or that bad hairdo. really nobody is, or at least not near as many people as you think. And so in general, we all sort of demonstrate this spotlight bias. We all tend to walk around thinking that people pay attention to us more than is actually the case. But while this bias exists in general, we don't know a lot about whether it, or how or whether it fluctuates sort of situationally. So are there times or situations where this bias gets sort of exacerbated a little bit, where our perceptions become even more inaccurate? Or are there situations where our biases actually become more accurate or reduced, or our perceptions become more accurate? And so to sort of look at these, I guess, how situational factors might influence this bias, we have to understand why it manifests. Why does it happen? Well, it happens because we have to make assumptions about how much attention other people pay to us. And we do this based on the attention that we pay to ourselves. And spoiler alert, we pay a lot of attention to ourselves. And so we try to sort of adjust that or take other people's perspectives and try to guess how much attention they pay to us, but we are not very good at it. What I thought was interesting, though, is offline, when I'm engaging with people in a big room, I have to make assumptions about who's paying attention to me. Online, I don't have to make assumptions. I know exactly how much people are paying attention to me. There's a little number that tells me. And so I had this idea that because online attention is so quantified and it takes the guesswork out of the equation, does that affect then how I leave that online space and go out into the real world? Does that affect my spotlight bias in those real world interactions? And so we ran a lot of studies. We had people view mock posts, similar to the ones I showed you earlier. We manipulated how much attention they got. We ran sort of these anecdotal, scenario-based, or just scenarios asking people how much attention they would think people were paying to them offline. And we kept finding that people who got more attention from that sharing episode reported an increased they thought more people were paying attention to them offline. The problem was there was an issue with directionality here. We submitted this paper to a journal and reviewers said, well, is it really that it's a bias? Or are people who get more attention online, who get more likes and views, are they actually being paid more attention to offline? And we said, that's a very good point. And so we ran what I think is a really cool study to sort of get at the actual bias, the misperception, if you will. So what we did is we ran this study where we brought students into the lab and we had them look up their most recent social media post. And we asked them, how much attention did that post get? Did it get a lot of attention, sort of more than you normally get? Or did it get a little attention, less than you normally get? And right after they looked up that post, we sort of primed them to think about the attention they received online. We had them leave the room and go into an interaction with a couple of other students. We told them that these other two students were also participants, but really they were paid research assistants, what we call confederates. And we sat all three students down at a table and they all put on headphones and they pushed play on an audio recording. And while the participant was listening to a boring recording, I know it was boring because I made it, a recording about the importance of academic research, the confederates were hearing information about where to direct their attention. Okay, and so they were hearing things like, look at the participant, and they would glance at the participant. Look at the wall, and they'd look away. Look at your computer. And we did this so that we could control the exact amount of time that participants were actually observed. And that way, when they left the lab, we asked them how much time they thought they were observed. We had a baseline, an accurate baseline to compare it to. So out of 112 seconds in this audio clip, just under 2 minutes, participants were actually looked at for 30 seconds. When they went back to their computers, we said, okay, there was 112 seconds in that audio clip. How many seconds do you think you were being observed? And we subtracted that reported number from 30. So numbers higher than 30 mean that they thought that they're demonstrating a spotlight bias. They think they're being observed more than was the case. Numbers lower than 30 mean, or numbers closer to 30 mean less bias, more accurate, and numbers lower than 30 would mean a flip, the opposite. They think they're being ignored. And what we found was, on the x-axis here, you'll see this is subjective attention received from their online post. So when they looked up their post and they said, how much attention did you get? The people in the middle said, pretty normal. The people on the right said a lot more than normal. The people on the left said a lot less than normal. And that y-axis is the spotlight value. So at the middle, at 0 on the x-axis, you see that people who got average levels of attention from sharing did indeed report a small spotlight bias. It was small, but it was significant. It was significantly different than 0. We observed that spotlight bias. But when people shared that content online and they got more attention than normal, here on the right side, you'll see that they demonstrated an enhanced spotlight bias. So their offline perceptions became even more inaccurate because they had received higher levels of attention online. On the flip side, on the left side of the graph, people who received less attention than normal actually they reported a reduced bias. They became more accurate for a bit, and then when they received way less than normal, it actually flipped and they felt they were being ignored. So what this is showing in general is that when we share content online and we receive attention, the amount of attention that we get online affects our subsequent interactions offline in terms of how much attention we think others are paying to us. So across these two sort of outcome variables, there's a lot of implications for brands. We are a college of business after all. So number one, it shows the importance for brands of helping their customers generate attention when they share about brand-related content, especially if you're an experiential brand. So if you are OSU Athletics, you're largely facilitating experiences. How do we help our customers get attention when they share about those experiences? Because the more attention they get, the more satisfied they're going to be, and in turn, the more positive word of mouth they're going to turn around and share. Those are outcomes we want to maximize. And then when we look at the spotlight bias, we know that people who are getting more attention are more likely to think that they're the focus of others' attention offline. And that has implications for brands who sell luxury products, conspicuous products, because people who tend to think they're the focus of attention are more prone to want to look good, are more prone to want to show off, and those sorts of things. Maybe more importantly, there's also implications for consumers. I'm showing that when people share content online, the amount of attention that content generates for them influences how they perceive the offline world around them. So for one, the more attention that they get, the higher their self-esteem and their egocentrism are going to be. Those are meaningful outcomes that can have a lot of implications for well-being and other things. The attention that they get also influences how consumers think back on the experiences that they've had. And that can maybe unduly influence their future consumption. If I look back and think that I've had this wonderful experience, maybe it wasn't all that good, maybe it just actually received a lot of attention, I might be prone to do that again, which may be sort of a suboptimal outcome for me. And then lastly, the attention that we get online influences how accurately we perceive the attention others pay to us offline, which again, it's already something that is a bias that we have, and the attention that we get online can either make it worse or actually reverse it and make us feel ignored, which again, there are mental health implications either way. So the bottom line here is that people generally want attention from others. It's something that people generally desire, it's something that they seek, it's something that they go out of their way to try to get. But what I find is that consumers are largely unaware of how this attention can affect their subsequent offline behaviors and perceptions. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you found it interesting, and I'm looking forward to our offline discussion.
Thank you, Matthew. Now we're going to transition into the interactive segment of today's event, where we're going to turn the spotlight to you as our attendees for direct engagement with Dr. Matthew Hall. It's time to tap into those curiosities that we encouraged you to explore at the start of the event. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our Q&A with our first question. Great talk, Matthew. That was very interesting, a very well done study, very rigorously put together that taps into something that I think a lot of people can relate to. You're a marketing expert. So the first question that I will have is going to take the focus from this broader societal level more down to the consumer engagement marketing strategy perspective. From your perspective, from what you know about this study and what you've done in your other research, what would you say the implications of these findings are for businesses and brands in terms of consumer engagement and the way that they like to market their products?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think touched on a little bit of that at the end of the talk, but definitely something that we can expound on a little bit. So when, if you're a manager or a brand or you're working for a brand that has some sort of consumption experience that you provide, right? So if your main offering isn't tangible, so if you're OSU Athletics, if you own a bowling alley or a mini golf course or something, right? Your customers are going to be sharing about these experiences. And that's something that you want them to do because that essentially represents free word of mouth to your other customers. But what our findings sort of indicate or highlight is the importance of recognizing that it doesn't just stop when they share. The way that other people respond to that shared content can really influence consumer outcomes, which can in turn influence outcomes for you as a brand. And so I think the sort of big takeaway here is not just for brands to encourage sharing. Yes, they want their customers to share, but they also need to sort of follow up on how that sharing is responded to by other consumers. So paying attention to if my customers share content about that experience, which consumers who share about that are getting more attention. Those customers, according to my findings, are going to be likely in a state of sort of looking back on that experience more positively. They might be ripe to follow up with them in terms of offering some subsequent consumption offering, maybe offering another ticket purchase or offering them some sort of discount because they might be in a mindset to make purchases. On the other side of that, you might have some consumers who share and don't get as much attention as they want, and those consumers might be less satisfied, and that could be a great opportunity for you to follow up with them by recognizing that and saying, maybe there's something else that we can offer them, or reach out to them to make them feel a little more valued, or remind them of the good things that happened during the experience so that they're not anchoring on that attention as a way to generate their satisfaction. And then on the spotlight side of things, I really, really like that paper or that work, mostly because it's something that people already struggle with in terms of their accuracy at sort of interpreting their offline environments. And if we're a manager and we're looking at these things, especially in industries where we are offering something that is like a luxury brand, right? People who wear luxury brands, they do so because they want to be seen. Mm-hmm. And if they think they're being observed, then they're more likely to want to wear things that are attention-getting or likely to manage perceptions. But also not just in the luxury game, things like embarrassment preventing products. And so if you're Tide and you're selling a Tide to go stain remover pen, well, if I think everybody's looking to me, I'm going to be really hypersensitive to how I look. And so things like that, things like cosmetic products, these can all have sort of implications in terms of if people think that they're the spotlight or in the spotlight or are the focus of attention, then those types of products might be more appealing to them.
Great. Yeah, fantastic answer. It raises a very interesting point. I think that attention is a commodity in our modern day society. It's something that can be leveraged. It can be something that can be controlled. It's something that is very valuable to organizations. I'm going to actually flip the question on its head for a quick moment. How about from the consumer's perspective? One of the really cool things about studies like this is that it will highlight potential flaws that we have in the way that we process the world around us, for lack of a better term. How can a consumer be mindful of the spotlight effect, not just in the way that they interact with brands, but in their kind of day-to-day lives?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and one that I find myself, as somebody who studies this topic, sort of noticing, or I don't want to say struggling with, but just I become hyper aware of that in my day-to-day life. Walking in today, I'm like, I'm going to be on camera today. You know, I need to make sure that my hair looks good or that all of these things are in place. Because when I look at myself in the camera, I'm going to notice that I don't look exactly like I normally do. Most other people aren't going to notice those things, and that's just that spotlight bias manifesting. And so I think it's really interesting when we see these instances in which that bias gets even bigger, because we're already really bad at interpreting a lot of these offline environments or these social situations, if you will, and just showing that those sort of misperceptions can be enhanced is something that matters. And I think especially when we look at, as I briefly mentioned in the video, implications for well-being are pretty massive here, I think. As we see people, when they're getting less attention than they want online, we see egocentrism decreasing, which may be a good thing in some contexts, but we also see things like self-esteem decreasing. And so you see these people, or we might run into situations where people are really feeling down on themselves simply because a post received fewer views than they thought it would. And consumers don't take the time to think about how, that's probably the result of the algorithm just not putting it in front of as many people as it could have. Or it's a result of other people being busy or scrolling through quickly and not taking time to push like when really they saw it. But again, consumers likely aren't taking that elaborative step to make those assumptions. They're just looking at it and saying, oh man, I only got 25 views. That's not very many. I don't feel great about myself. And so there's a lot going on behind the scenes that I think consumers don't take into account when they're letting these outcomes bias their self-perceptions.
Great words of wisdom, something to keep in mind. So I could ask 50 follow-up questions, but I'm going to give our audience the chance to interact as well. And so here's a question from the audience. Generational differences, a very big topic in our society today. We see the lives and existences of my children are very different from the ones that I had growing up, and which are then in turn very different from the experiences that my parents did. So, this may not be within the scope of your study, but we'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, are there generational or demographic differences in spotlight biases? Are there certain things about individuals and the worlds that they grew up in that have influenced this effect over the years?
That's an awesome question. It's not something that we have directly looked at in terms of, yes, we measure some demographic variables in our studies, but we haven't spent a lot of time sort of looking or parsing apart how those outcomes differ based on those variables. But I do think that there's just sort of some, I guess I have some intuitions, if you will. And I think specifically one of the things that we found is that these outcomes are really dependent on consumers' expectations. And so when you get more attention than you think you should get, that you tend to respond positively, right? Because it sort of violates those expectations in a positive way. When you get less attention than you think you should get, it violates them in a negative way and leads to some of these more negative outcomes. And so my assumption would be that when we look at demographic groups or generational differences, there's probably some differences in expectations there as well.
Certainly.
I would assume when, my parents, your parents, my grandparents, whoever, if they're sharing content online, they're probably not expecting thousands of views in return because they probably don't have that many friends. They don't interact with that large of a network. Whereas, a teenager or like say an influencer might have millions of followers. So to them, getting, a million likes might not be very much. And that might lead to some sort of detrimental outcome. So I don't have data directly speaking to that, but I do think that there would be some differences there largely in terms of driving expectations for attention.
Great, yeah, thank you. Another question from the audience. Is all attention created equally? So to elaborate on this, positive attention versus negative attention, or does attention from close friends, those that we like, people we aspire to be more like, or maybe even those that we look down upon a little bit less favorably so? How does that influence the way that we process the attention that we receive?
Yeah, I love this question. It feels like somebody's been reading my research notes here because this is definitely a direction that I'd love to take this work. So I can answer part of this question with some evidence that we have. So in most of our studies, when we use this term attention, we typically measure this or operationalize this using something we call unvalenced attention. So we're looking at attention that it's not a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it's something just like an eyeball, a view, a click, right? It's not necessarily an indication that they saw it and liked it, it's just an indication that they're aware that it happened. And so typically when we look at these outcomes, we thought it was really meaningful to show that you don't need the affirmation, the thumbs up, to get these positive outcomes. We do have a study though where we actually compare positive attention to this sort of neutral unvalenced attention. And what we find is that the positive valence doesn't actually provide a further boost. So people actually just want other people to know what they've done, and getting that positive social signal is enough to get value, to the extent that people aren't getting more value out of getting the views plus the likes. But what I think is really interesting is this negative attention idea, especially from the extent of we have a lot of people in our society today who almost go looking for negative attention, right? They'd rather get sort of the negative feedback because it means people are talking about them and giving them that attention. And so I'm really interested to take this in a direction of sort of this intersection between getting a lot of attention, but people telling you that what you did is bad or something like that. Because I think there's some utility to be gained from just getting attention. But there's also disutility a lot of times in being told that what we did is bad. I think it also matters on your motives. If you set out knowing that people are going to respond negatively to what you have to say, then maybe there's not that disutility from the negative attention because you knew it was coming. Whereas if you thought this was a great thing that I did and then people respond negatively,
sure,
now it's violating that expectation bit again, which I think will lead to more negative outcomes. But I love that question, and I think I answered all of it. I'm not sure if I missed on any of it, but I do think it's a really interesting topic.
It really reinforces this idea that there's no such thing as bad press, right? And that it extends from what I'm hearing you say to our individual press that we receive in our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely.
Another question from the audience. On the topic of market impact and consumer trust, how does viral content shape consumers' perceptions of a brand? And what are the risks of basing business strategy on fleeting online trends rather than a deeper marketing insight? Really a paradigm shift that we're experiencing here where this is very front of mind. So in what ways is it similar or different from the way that it has been done in the past?
Yeah, so I think virality is something that's interesting because, so obviously brands want content to go viral, right? It means customers are talking about them. It means they're at the forefront of consumers' minds. And it also, there's some research out there that shows that when companies are quick to jump on sort of these viral trends, so if there's some TikTok trend that's happening and brands jump on board, it makes them look more innovative or sort of more with it, right? Which is a good thing. But that can also, like you said, lead, or like the question indicated, sort of lead to more of a reliance on these sort of short, whimsical things as opposed to really understanding your consumers. And so I think firms have to strike a balance between being sort of like having a strategy and sticking to it, but also being able to pivot and sort of go with some of these more sort of trendy or viral things because it shows their ability to sort of go with the flow a little bit and be innovative. So it's definitely a little bit of a tightrope, right, between sticking to your strategy but then being willing to pivot when necessary.
Great answer. Here's another question. So I know as well as anybody that the research process is messy, it's confusing, and sometimes it surprises us. I think that's one of the really beautiful things about it. And a lot of the things that we learn in that process will inspire new areas of focus that can help innovate and drive our fields in new directions. So in that vein, I'd be curious to hear, are there any surprising findings that you've encountered over the course of studying this topic? And the second part of this is what might be things that you would want to focus on going forward? What are some future research questions that you'd be interested in?
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting or potentially surprising things that we found was that idea that getting positive attention didn't have a supplementary effect on receiving neutral attention. That was something, when we ran that study, we honestly expected that it would. Our goal was to show that getting higher levels of neutral attention was better than getting less neutral attention, right? More views is better than less views. That was what we set out to show. But when we tested, does getting a lot of views plus quite a few likes, is that better than getting just views? We found that it really wasn't. And that was something that surprised us a little bit. I think we went into that sort of course, formally we didn't have, we don't have a hypothesis here, but in our heads I think we're thinking, yeah, I think it might, but it didn't. And so I think that was something that was surprising. Another thing that I'm really interested in diving into is I mentioned this expectations bit, right? And how it's high versus low, getting more versus less, but really it's about getting more or less relative to how much we think we should get. And what I'm really interested in is how do customers develop these expectations? What is a lot, and how do we make that determination? Do we set those? Is it a constant expectation level? Is every post that I share on Instagram, do I think every one of them is going to get 50, 100, 200 views or likes, or does it depend on the content? Right? If I share a post from an extraordinary vacation, do I have one set of expectations versus if I take my dog for a walk, do I have another set of expectations? And how do those sort of move? I don't know. I'm interested. I think that could be really fascinating, especially given how important expectations are to the findings that we've talked about today.
Certainly, yeah. They define the way that we experience our world. They define the way that we approach, and we are always calibrating to these expectations. So I'd be interested to follow up with you in a year or two and see what you found on that. Yeah. Another question from the audience. Can you please talk to us about how receiving online attention impacts our memory of shared experiences? And what are the psychological mechanisms that are driving this effect?
Yeah, so this is something that I've studied for a long time. This paper actually was part of my dissertation in my doctoral program. And so it's something that's always sort of I don't know, I've been fascinated by it. And what we've sort of dialed into is there's a couple of things that's happening. First and foremost, when we get attention from other people, the more attention that we get, the better we feel about ourselves. There's just sort of something innate inside of us that getting attention, because you mentioned this earlier, it is kind of a commodity. Other people value their attention, and they have a very limited amount of attention, and there's so many things they can devote that attention to. And so when they decide to give it to me, that makes me feel good because it shows that they're prioritizing me and the things that I've done over all of the millions of other things they could pay attention to. And so the in academia we use this term construct, right? There has to be a name that we give to this thing, this process, and what we call it is social self-esteem. which we didn't make that up. That's been a thing for a long time. But it's this social component of how we view ourselves and the strength of the relationships we have with others. That's sort of this main mechanism. And what research has shown in psychology for a long time is that when you're in a state of elevated self-esteem, you tend to remember past events more positively. It's just sort of this sort of warm, fuzzy, call it like a positive halo effect. And so if I'm in this state of elevated self-esteem and I'm thinking about this experience, which I am because I'm looking at the post, that's how I know I just got this many likes or views, I'm going to think about it more positively. And then from another sort of perspective, and something else that I haven't studied as much, but talking about things I'd like to study, there's a sort of signaling component. Most of the time when we share things online, we're doing so because we want to tell a story about ourselves. If I share about an extraordinary vacation, I want people to know that I've been to this place, right? It's like there's this thing called the experiential CV or resume. I want people to know that I've added this to my resume. If I'm doing something fun and adventurous, I want people to know that I'm adventurous, that I go on hikes, that I go whitewater rafting or parasailing or whatever, because that tells them something about me. And so getting attention when we self-signal like that is an indication that other people have gotten the message. So now there's a certain number of people that's quantified that get it. They know that thing about me now, and that also is going to make me feel better about those components of myself, because not only am I that thing, other people know that I'm that thing. And I think that's a really interesting thing or component to this as well.
Yeah, we're very social creatures.
Yes.
Our identities are heavily defined by those around us. And so I hear what you're saying. It feels really good when we feel that our perceived identity is being validated. And this might be a pathway through that. So interesting bringing in of this underlying psychological mechanisms there to bring it all together. Another question from our audience. So there's a very fine line that we have to walk when we put ourselves out there. And this is a little bit of an ambiguous concept because it's defined not just within us, but in terms of others' evaluations of us as well. I know the spotlight effect mostly focuses on the way that we see things. But our audience member is asking, when does the spotlight bias go from pride in appearance and well-being to sort of a vanity? When do you think that we cross that line? Is there a point where we cross that line? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of it is, like you said, it's sort of inside the individual. Because if I'm myself and I'm worried about my appearance, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I need to be worried about it to a certain extent. But at some point, I might become so overconfident that it does sort of move into this place where I'm being vain or something like that. So I don't know that there's a magical switch. I don't know that it necessarily is driven by the amount of attention that we get. Although, as we look at that expectation piece, I do think that there's a lot of individuals out there, especially who are so sort of, and again, this mechanism sort of linking this attention to the spotlight effect is egocentrism. How much attention we pay to ourselves and how important we think we are relative to those around us. And I do think that we're living in a society where more and more people are sort of having this sense of elevated egocentrism. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that I can go out and become a celebrity tomorrow by streaming my video games or doing whatever. And so I do think that there is, as that progresses, the expectation that people have is that more people are paying attention to me because I'm a phenomenon now. And then I do think that might shift into that vanity space. Regarding the distinction between vanity and well-being, that's a whole other discussion that is, there are a lot of psychologists who I'm sure have been studying that for a long time, and I don't know that there's an answer in terms of what flips that switch, but it is an interesting space. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's a virtuous cycle, right? We have to find that balance in all of us, and where that line sits is a very difficult thing to nail down. So I appreciate you entertaining this speculation.
Very individually determined, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So as a psychologist spending a lot of time studying how people process social information through social media, one of our viewers is asking, is there, in your opinion, a specific social platform that might contribute more to social biases than others? I understand this is perhaps going outside the scope of this project, but from your expertise, from your experience, do you think that there's differences amongst these platforms, and maybe which ones have the biggest effect?
That's a great question. Definitely not something I've studied, but I do think that, again, when we look at platform by platform, there will be differences in expectations. Some platforms are a lot more sort of directed communication. So if we think about a platform like Snapchat, for example, most people, yes, you can send Snapchats more broadly, but oftentimes Snapchat is used more for like one-to-one direct community or one-to-a-few communication, where you're sending a snap to a handful of people or something. And so in that sense, probably a little bit less of this going on because the attention is more constrained. You know fewer people are going to see it because you're sort of narrow casting that message as opposed to broadcasting it to anybody and everybody. In the same sense, when you share something on most channels, right, it's constrained by the number of followers you have. And so some platforms are just a little bit more popular, and so maybe people have more followers on those platforms, which enables the receipt of more attention because it's able to get in front of more eyeballs. If you have something like on X, formerly Twitter, if you have a public account like that can go to anybody. It doesn't just have to, anybody can follow you, anybody can see that content. Or on Facebook if you're a public account. So I think that there are some sort of, I guess, ways that the platform might sort of dictate how this goes, but largely it's about how many people can you get your sort of signal or your message or your shared content in front of, and how does the platform constrain how many people can respond to that, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for entertaining the question. There's a lot of moving parts here. I think that's something that we all can appreciate, and it's one of the challenges of a researcher like you to really try to isolate down and identify the key effects. And it's a world that's going to continue to evolve and change.
Yeah.
Another question from our audience. In the business context, how can going viral, we're going to return to this question of virality, whether for a product, campaign, leadership decision, how can that distort strategic thinking and influence maybe the decision making on the organization side?
Yeah, another great question. And I think this really closely relates back to a question that was asked earlier about sort of the difference between sticking to your strategy versus being obsessed with this sort of viral component. Because again, like it is a positive signal to consumers if you can sort of piggyback on these trends. But I think a lot of companies become so obsessed with chasing these trends that they sort of lose sight of that strategic direction overall. And one of the things that we know consistently that's been shown in a lot of research is that it's good for brands to have a voice, to have sort of a set of parameters that most of their content sort of falls within. And when you lose sight of that, if you're chasing these viral trends and sort of being pulled outside of your traditional voice or perspective, that can be bad. And so there's a unique challenge of, can I sort of chase this viral content or chase these trends while staying true to who I am and what I want my consumers to sort of see me as in terms of my brand, right? Because social media voice is a component of brand. When we see a lot of these, there's a lot of brands out there like Wendy's on Twitter is known for being, X is known for being very snarky and very witty. That's their voice. And so it might make a little more sense for them to go chasing these viral things than a company that's known for being a little more reserved and a little more on topic in those online spaces. So again, this constant battle between having a strategy and sticking to it, because that's what we typically think of in terms of promotions and advertising and things like that, versus being responsive to these sort of ongoing changing trends.
Yeah, it's been an interesting thing to see evolve, right? I mean, a lot of people are familiar with the Duolingo owl, which has kind of a reputation for kind of a shock form of marketing that maybe didn't exist before this new social media world that we live in emerged. So it's an interesting topic to be at the forefront of. I'm happy that you're a part of our team. What does our current research, so again, taking it outside of this study, maybe to the literature a little bit more broadly, suggest about the long-term effects of viral attention on corporate reputation? So again, kind of focusing on what are the implications for the organization, and how can businesses empirically differentiate between valuable market signals and short-term digital noise?
Wow, that's a great question. Very deep and meaningful one, especially when we look at just sort of the scope. So I think one of the big things that we talk about, again, like, yes, companies want their content to go viral. They want people to pay attention to them. But one of the things that becomes most meaningful in this space is once we get people, can we keep them, right? That sort of retention piece. Because people may look at my post once because it's viral and it's blowing up, and that's a good thing. But can I get those people to follow me and pay attention to even more of my content? Now, some firms, some brands rely on sort of that, like you mentioned Duolingo, that repeated shock factor, like just continually doing that and sort of building a brand on it. Most brands aren't going to do that, right? Because, and if most brands did that, it would become less novel and less unique, and then the brands that did it first would lose a little bit of that maybe luster or uniqueness. And so I think one of the big questions is this idea of conversion. Can we get the people, when we do go viral, can we get the people who pay attention to those fleeting posts, can we get them to stay? Can we keep them? Can we sell them something? Can we get them to turn into a loyal customer somehow, or at least a loyal follower, which we know can then in turn into purchases and things like that. So much easier said than done. It's easy to say, yeah, just get people to follow you. But virality can be a way to at least make people aware that these things are happening. Right? A lot of people would not think twice about Wendy's, but when they see some super funny post from Wendy's on X, they're like, oh, Wendy's, haven't been there in a while, haven't thought about them in a while, but it's funny, right?
Sure. The eternal struggle between quality and quantity. It's never going to be one. And as with most things, there's probably some kind of balanced approach. But it is interesting that your research raises the point that maybe that distinction is a little bit more blurry sometimes than we might think.
Right.
All right, second to last question, 2 more for you. On the topic of consumer perceptions and market trends, how does viral content shape consumer perceptions and purchasing behaviors in the short and long term? And what are some of the methodologies that you and other researchers have used to study sustainability of viral-driven market trends?
It's a really good question. So I personally haven't studied either of these things much, but I do think that there are a lot of interesting things to be gleaned here. There are a lot of scholars who are looking at sort of what is it that makes things go viral. There a scholar named Jonah Berger at Wharton at UPenn is doing a lot of things with language and sort of how different language or different emotionality, different signals can make things go viral. So there's a lot of content being done on what makes things go viral. To my knowledge, and maybe this is just a selection bias in terms of the content that I've read, I haven't seen a lot on sort of the effects of virality on purchases. I am sure that there's been some work in those spaces, but I don't know much about it. My sort of inclination is, again, sort of that, how can we leverage the attention? Because again, when we talk about attention as a commodity, firms going viral, that's attention to the firm as well, right? And that's what branding and marketing communications has been trying to do forever, is to get consumer eyeballs to pay attention to the firm, to dedicate that valued commodity to the firm and their messaging. And so can we leverage that virality? Can we leverage that time, that brief moment in time where we have the attention of our consumers to do something with it? And I think that the firms that are better able to do that, number one, better able to go viral and leverage these ways to get attention, that's a good thing. But just having it may not be enough if you can't do something with it. And so that didn't exactly answer the question, but I hope it at least sort of nudged maybe the thinking in that direction for the ask, whoever asked that.
Certainly, yeah. It's a brave new world. It's an exciting time to be a marketing scholar, I think, and the fact that the methodologies that you all are going to be coming up with and that you're employing are going to be tailored to the specific phenomena that you're studying. So it's really cool to read your research. I've gotten the chance to dive into some of it and see the way that you unpack some of these very difficult, hard to nail down questions, and to see the tools that are made available to you in the coming years and decades to really unpack this deeper is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah. All right, final question. The irony is not lost on me that we're talking about the spotlight effect as you are sitting here under the spotlight. So multiple spotlights. Yeah, right. So I'm going to take a moment to embarrass you a little bit. The question asker here is wondering what excites you most about your own work? Yeah. What motivates you to produce such high quality research? What makes you tick in terms of your drive and desire to answer important and really interesting questions like these?
Yeah, well, thank you. This is a great, I like ending on this question. This is a nice, easy one to talk about. So I think most of us as scholars, we're drawn to things that just we find interesting, right? We see something happening and we're like, man, I don't really know that I can explain what's going on there, and I want to dive deeper. And so, for example, this whole process of getting attention and why that matters, it all started in my PhD program. I was studying at a coffee shop, and I saw just like another college student, a woman who was like taking these ridiculous selfies with her coffee cup. And I'm like, who is posting that? Why? What's the value that you get out of posting that? And it sort of led me into this, like, that's an attention-seeking behavior. You must value that attention somehow. And so that sort of led me down this rabbit hole. And so a lot of my projects just stem from looking at the world around me and trying to figure out, I don't really know that I can explain why that's happening, and I want to. And then I think this other piece that we've looked at is sort of this consumer well-being component of trying to figure out, like, are these like some of these macro level trends that are happening, are there opportunities where these can kind of go bad for people, especially when people don't necessarily know about it? And that's why I was drawn to this spotlight effect bias, right? It's this idea that like we think we're out there interpreting the world perfectly correctly. That's yet another bias, right?
Sure.
Like we're very, we think highly of ourselves a lot of times, and especially how we see the world. And we're not right a lot. and so where are these sort of misperceptions in terms of how people are interpreting things versus how like the rest of the world is interpreting them? And so I think there's a lot of consumption phenomena where we're not quite interpreting things the way that maybe they are. And how can we sort of identify those misalignments and study them a little deeper, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, there's plenty of questions left to be answered.
Yes,
it's an exciting time to be involved in the research, and I appreciate you sharing some of your insights with us today. So thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks.
And thank you to our audience as well for engaging with us today. We'll be back in the spring to feature another College of Business faculty member through this series. In case you'd ever like to revisit any of our Thought Leadership Series talks, you can access them anytime on our website. Again, we've really appreciated having you with us here today. Be on the lookout for a follow-up survey that we'll be sending your way. Your feedback here is invaluable as we look to strive to strengthen our connection with our audience and to share out our scholarship better going forward. On behalf of the College of Business, I'm Jay Hardy. Thank you very much. We look forward to hosting you at a future Thought Leadership Series. Go Beavs!